Hey, we're going to kind of go straight into talking to good old Mr. Jared Benson over at Perma Pier Foundation Repair. Mr. Jared, how we doing?
I'm doing well this morning. Thank you.
Good. Well, let's we're going to talk a little more real estate here. So, Jared, what's going on?
Well, normally when I come in here, I'm talking about foundation repair, and I know how exciting that is for everybody.
That's right.
So I thought I'd bring something a little closer to home for you guys. January 1, there was a lot of big changes that took effect in your arena and the rules and regulations you have. And
who got in my arena?
Yeah, Trek.
How dare they? Out. Yeah. Get out.
Yeah, so... any sort of governing body tends to like to govern as much as they can, and that's what happened. So for those of you who may or may not be aware, I'll tell you what it is, then we'll talk a little bit about it. But when you have a home under contract, you're not allowed to test the plumbing anymore without written consent from the homeowners. So it limits your ability to do inspections during your option period.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that you hadn't quite heard about or heard rumblings of maybe?
Yeah, just rumblings of, and of course they're always changing what we do out there and not necessarily always letting us know, in the best timing for sure. And of course they take things out of the contract that have been in the contract for years, and then they put things in that are new. And you're right. The regulators like to regulate.
That's right.
And it can be frustrating for sure. And this is going to be a pretty big deal because inspections are huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're right. Issues could arise from an inspection, and the buyer backs out, and then the seller still owns it. Obviously, could be a big deal.
Yeah. So that this plumbing test that we talked about. The technical term, what it's written in the Trek guidelines is a hydrostatic pressure test is what's not allowed to be performed. So generally that's a test on the freshwater line to make sure there's no leaks on that water coming in the house. That's also the high pressure line, which generally you're not terribly worried about because when there's a leak there, you know it pretty quick. Right. Water starts coming through the walls, out the floors, and everywhere else.
Right.
The one that it really catches that people miss a lot is the sewer line, the low pressure line where all the toilets and drains feed into the city sewer.
Mm-hmm.
And that one is a low pressure, so it just kind of seeps into the ground over time and can cause foundation issues if not corrected.
And let's hold that for a second. We're going to take a short break. Then we're going to come back and kind of delve a little bit more into this and why it's really so important. Folks, Inside Real Estate Sports Entertainment, coming back in a few.
Now back to Inside Real Estate. Here's Mike the Realtor.
Hey folks, Mike Kruziniga, we're back, Inside Real Estate Sports Entertainment. Hey, we're talking with Jared Benson, Perma Pier Foundation Repair. By the way, coming up after this segment, we got Coach Fred Williams, the WNBA Dallas Weens here live in studio for the sports segment. We're going to be talking to him shortly. By the way, we're giving away some tickets to upcoming Dallas Weens games. So if you want to call in, 888-787-KLIF, 888-787-KLIF. If you want to call in a little bit later in the show, you may want to call in now to get in the queue, get in line for those tickets. Jared, so let's get back into this. Now, okay, one of the biggest things that we look at as agents with buyers on the buy side at the inspection report is this hydrostatic test, because we're looking to see if the water meter is turning when no water is called for in the house, meaning we don't have on the tub, the dishwasher, the sinks. So if we have none of those things on, the water meter should not be moving.
Yeah, and that's going to be that freshwater line that's coming into the house. And so that's one way just anybody can go check. Plumbers have some more tools they can use to actually make sure that it's actually holding its pressure as well. There could be such a small leak, you're not going to stand there long enough to see the dial turn.
Yeah.
But that's part of it, and then, like I said, the sewer line. And I wish I'd been able to find the actual written paragraph in your Trek guidelines, but there's way too many papers for me to go through for that. So I actually found an article that was posted by Gilbert Gonzalez, and he's the San Antonio Board's Vice President of Risk Management. And just very briefly, this is just what he says about it. He says, language was included in paragraph 7 dealing with inspections. Contracts were amended to include language that hydrostatic testing is not allowed to be performed on the property unless the consent of the seller has been obtained. The consent must be in writing. And the funny thing about that is that the consent must be in writing, but they didn't give you anything to get the consent on.
Right.
So from everything I've heard from realtors and brokers is they just said you have to get it in writing, but the TREC didn't promulgate any forms for that. So it's kind of up to the brokerage. I did a little bit of research on that, and I see some back and forth with attorneys on some wording that an Amarillo board came up with, and he's like, well, I don't know about that, so you should have another form signed saying that this form isn't a TREC form. And so just the forms you're having to get signed are just increasing exponentially with one form that's not a TREC form and another form that is a TREC form that just says the other one's not a TREC form.
I know. And these are the hoops we jump through, dealing with the government at any level. These are the hoops we have to deal with specifically in our industry. Yeah, I mean, the TREC forms are what is required, by law to complete a real estate transaction in the state of Texas. There are additional forms out there that the Texas Association of Realtors provides, the National Association of Realtors provides, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, we're probably going to look at just, if the TREC's going to mandate this, then they have to provide a promulgated form for us to use. All those forms are fill in the blank. Yeah. But I think until then, what we'll have to do is just come up with something, and every brokerage is probably going to do something differently. And it can be as simple as, an affidavit really from the owner. And honestly, this is probably going to be something that's going to have to be notarized, similar to the T-47 on a survey. It's going to have to be an affidavit stating, I, the owner, consent to allowing the property to be inspected.
Your job's getting even more fun by the day.
By a Texas real estate, inspector, a TREC licensed inspector.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and, just as we're talking about this and people are getting worried about plumbing tests, one thing that I want to tell people is if you talk to a plumber, they're not worried about a plumbing test causing a plumbing leak. Mm-hmm. Kind of the funny thing about that is if you have a leak and you have the test and you haven't performed a test, how are you going to know there's a leak?
Right.
Then you do the test and then there's a leak or there isn't a leak. So, if you talk to a master licensed plumber, they're going to tell you there's really not a concern for the test causing the problems, but maybe someone caused a big enough stink or maybe it happened one time and now everyone else is dealing with the problems. From that.
And it was probably just a plumber brought attention to the fact there was an issue, and then they said, well, there wasn't an issue until they inspected it.
Well, we didn't know there was an issue
until
you
weren't
inspected
aware until it was inspected.
Yeah, so that's something I'd tell people. You know what? It's not that big a deal. Talk to a plumber. They're not going to be worried about it. But it's going to come down to how you like to do your real estate. Are you the listing agent working with a seller and they don't want to allow that? Or are you the buyer's agent and you want to get it done to protect your buyer? Kind of going to come down to what you got to do for your client.
Maybe the seller will say, I will not allow any inspections.
That's what
you
I've
buy
heard.
it or you don't.
or they don't even say that. They just won't let you access the property. I've had an agent call me and said, hey, we really need the foundation looked at, but the listing agent just told us that we can't, she won't let us in the property at all.
Right.
I was like, well, that's kind of odd. So there's all sorts of ways that they're going to
So probably creative. These guys had a big geyser in the middle of their house, and they were just waiting for an inspector to come along they could blame it on.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, you bring up a really good point because this is going to play out in all kinds of ways.
Yeah. Well, here, one thing I want to tell all our listeners, your listeners today, is that Perma Pier Foundation Repair of Texas owns a plumbing company, Perma Pier Plumbing Repair of Texas, and we do these tests. And if this is something that you or your clients or your homeowner, if you are afraid you have a leak, if you will call into our office, talk to our plumbing division, and you mention my name, we'll give you a free hydrostatic pressure test. We'll test your plumbing at no charge, which is normally $250 to $350 value. But that's something that we've been offering to people, and it's not forever. So if you wait and you call 6 months later, we might not be doing it for free anymore.
Yeah, well, and if you're listening to the insurance segments that we do at JC Harder, we constantly talk about water damage to properties. It's the number one. So why not take advantage, of Jared's offer and make sure there's no hidden leaks in there.
Yeah.
If you've noticed an increase in your water bill and you're not changing anything, then you might have a leak.
Yep.
Take advantage of Jared's offer right there to get that checked out.
Yeah, it'd be great, especially for your listeners if they're worried. We just like to provide value anywhere we can for, people who we do business with. So that would be a great way for them to take advantage of that. And it will do it for your buyers and sellers agents too. Mm-hmm. As long as you're in your option period on the buyer, we can't come out and test someone else's house. So as long as you have a contract on it,
yeah, exactly,
we'll come out and do what we can for you.
Absolutely. By the way, folks, as far as I'm concerned, best foundation repair company here in the DFW area, Perma Pier, been doing this forever. Over 20,000 jobs that they've done and counting. By the way, these are the guys that the big builders and the commercial guys call when they've got an issue with their foundations. And, of course, they've also got the plumbing division. We just talked about that special offer for a hydrostatic test. So if you've noticed an increase in your water bill and you're wondering what the heck's going on, you're going to have to call a plumber out. Shoot, we just gave you a free out right there.
Yeah.
Now there may be a cost to repair it.
There might be.
But a free check on it, which is a pretty big deal. And plumbing's pretty expensive out there these days. Folks, Jared Benson of Perma Pier Foundation Repair, Texas. Any last words?
Hey, man, I'm just glad to be here.
Well, it's good to see you as always.